Twoje miejsce docelowe jest właśnie tutaj. Typowy kierowca autobusu. Jesteś na miejscu. Zapraszam do oglądania. Jarosław Juszkiewicz.
Anyone missing a husband or wife? You've got to admit it. I had on once where I had a lady whose husband was always missing. And I would stand next to her looking at her going, right, has everyone got their husbands? And she would just go, yeah. And he was 2 buildings away. But she'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, no you don't. She went, oh, don't I? You have to keep him. We could have... They are my problem for a few more days. They are your responsibility for life. You made that vow. Okay, right, I want to continue talking to you about the flooding area of this, because we really want to focus on about the 82nd Airborn and the rough time that they had at this part, because that was heavily down to the flooding of the area. So as I said, the Germans take control and Nazis occupy after the Battle of France. So the Battle of France is the 2 weeks or 21 days that went after the evacuation of Dunkirk. So if you go back to the point where we've declared war after the invasion of Poland, and always remember as well, Russia invaded Poland at the same time as Germany. It wasn't just Germany, but you know, they changed to the winning side, so we don't talk about the bad stuff they did. Let's be honest, it's true. So at the time when the evacuation of Dunkirk took place, that was us going, right, we need to get our men out, simply because we've left our own country undefended. All of our military personnel are in France. Rommel's gone right around us. He's at the Pas de Calais. He's 26 miles from England, and we've gone, we don't have our army here. That was part of the evacuation of Dunkirk. Get our army back home to defend our land. And as I said to you, 300,000 men rescued, around 94,000 of them were French. Alright, they were brought back to England. However, after a few days, the Battle of France is still going on. They were sent back to France. After a couple of weeks, France fell. Unfortunately, at that point, the Germans take complete control of the country and they start the defensive strategies. This became apparent and more apparent after the failed Battle of Britain. Obviously failed for them, not for us. As soon as the Battle of Britain was won by the British, at that point, the Nazis went on the defence instead of the attack. They had gone from previously claiming land. They couldn't get to us. So at that point, the Atlantic Wall started becoming about that more as a defending what we had rather than securing more land and territory. Now, when it came to this area, the only way they would defend it, or could defend it, in very, what's the word I'm thinking of? The best way is through flooding, through natural resources, and that's when they started reversing the lock system. Close it to flood the area rather than allow the water out. So this whole area was completely swampy, muddy marshlands, okay? If you think of how hilly and rolly it is anyway, it was very easy to flood that with the help and the aid of such a high 50-foot tide. It was very easy to flood it. Now when you think back to Exercise Tiger that Dale told you about before, Exercise Tiger was chosen in the area of Slapton Sands because of its similarity to this area of Normandy. Slapton Sands is a nice shingle beach, but it is a swamp behind it. So there's another reservoir behind it. So the reason that we chose Slapton Sands is because it completely mirrors what would happen here. It wasn't just a random coastline, it is exactly the same layout with a reservoir on the other side. So that's why the men could actually get proper training for exactly what they would experience here. Now when Exercise Tiger took place, and obviously the U-boats got in, completely caused havoc and destruction, killing 791 men, the rumour around this, and historians argue and differ on this particular, I say fact, but the way that they believe the chain of command went is that they fed back, this is what we found, and it went up the chain of command, and some argue it got as far as Rommel. Rommel, looking at the comparison, and remember he was adamant that this was where they were going to land anyway, in Normandy, looking at the comparison of Utah to Slapton Sands, and we can show you a photograph of the comparison. You will see they are almost identical, and it reassured Rommel he's right, this is where it's going to be. At that point, yes, he didn't have control of the Panzers. Dale explained that to you yesterday. The Panzer Division division was above his pay grade. He did not have access or authority to move panzers around. That had to come from the very top. What he did have access to, though, was the 91st Division. And at the time, when you were looking at this peninsula, you had the 101st and the 82nd Airborne given their particular drop zones, and that was around Sainte-Mere-Eglise and Sainte-Marie-Eglise. Now, there was a section about 15 miles back from Utah, which was the drop zone of the 82nd Airborne. However, when Rommel got word of what was happening, he moved the 91st Division to the exact drop zone location that was going to be for the 82nd Airborne Division. And we know this because they conducted reconnaissance in the build-up to D-Day. Obviously, they would do constant reconnaissance flyovers to see what was changing. Big evacuated area suddenly has a whole division set up there, and this division had anti-tank weaponry, they had spotlights, anti-aircraft weaponry. Suddenly this has popped out of nowhere a mere 1 week before D-Day. That is very suspicious that after Exercise Tiger, suddenly this division has gone right behind 15 miles from Utah Beach, the identical peninsula, to San Francisco. This is why we have to really think he knew we were coming. He knew where it was going to be, we just didn't know, or he just didn't know when that was going to be. So if you imagine this flooded area, suddenly the 82nd are given new plans, new drop zone locations based on the reconnaissance that was discovered. Because everything was a mess on D-Day anyway, high winds, bad seas, so on and so forth, mist drops, you also got to think with the flight with the aircraft, such low cloud cover meant that they didn't know where their targets were. They were given the coordinates to drop, alright, as far as dropping their paratroopers and also dropping the shells in the build up to that. But when you can't see your target, knowing that you have a huge armada of 6,000 ships below you in the channel somewhere, a lot of them dropped late by about 3 seconds because they were scared of hitting the fleet, so they dropped too far inland. Same happened with the paratroopers. So when they were dropped, a lot of them landed in these flooded marshlands. Now with the paratroopers as well, what you've got to think about is the weight of their kit that they're carrying. Dale mentioned this to you yesterday. Some of these kits are up to about, they're around 40 kilos. Alright, so I don't know what that is in pounds. About 100 pounds, there you go. Alright, that's a boy fact, not a girl fact, okay? About 100 pounds of kit. Now every paratrooper, every person on the Higgins, every person on the cruisers, they were all given life preservers, you know, kind of like kids' rubber rings that they would wear around their waist, and they would be worn just at the bottom of your rib cage. Now imagine a 100 pound backpack with kit. What would happen is it would force the life preserver down, and it would end up around here. So when they landed in these muddy marshlands, they are very, very flooded, and unfortunately for a lot of the paratroopers, when they landed, they were so top heavy that they flipped upside down. And this is why this area is known for killing most of the paratroopers, not by gunfire, but by drowning. A lot of the paratroopers that landed in this area drowned because of these situations. Does that make a bit more sense with the flooding and stuff? Okay. We're only, I'd say, 10 minutes then away from Sainte-Marie-Eglise. I'll hand you back over to Dale. We're going to give you a bit of a controversial.
Oh, would you join Steve?
We can grab whatever you want to do.
Okay. Well, so Sainte-Marie-Eglise, it's a sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So it's an objective. They have to try and take Sainte-Mere-Eglise because it's you know, again, you want that vital roadway, crossways. But it had been bombed as part of the aerial bombardments, etc. And parts of the town were actually on fire. And so the French civilians and also the Germans in the town were reacting to what was happening on the ground just as the paratroopers were starting to descend. And so those paratroopers that were dropped sort of virtually on top of Sainte-Marie-Eglise actually are receiving ground fire as they come down. There's probably about 30 paratroopers, etc., that in the initial landing there that actually land directly near or on Sainte-Marie-Eglise, and they'll fight a really vicious battle against the Germans, and they'll end up having to wait for more troops to come in as the troops make their way from the various drop zones and misdrops, etc. One of the characters that drops into the town is John Steele. Now I'm going to tell you the story, very briefly, the story of John Steele. In the movie The Longest Day, he's played by Red Buttons, and what he does is he lands and his parachute catches on the steeple of the church, and he's caught there. He's been shot through the foot, and he's dangling from the steeple of the church while this fight, conflagration is going on around on the ground, and so he fakes death. He just hangs there, being as still as he can while this fighting, and then when the fighting subsides, the Germans notice him, they cut him down, they capture him. Right? He's later released when the Americans actually take Sainte-Mere-Eglise, which I think is generally regarded as the first town liberated as well, isn't it? So that's the story that's in most of the history, in the books, in the depictions on film. But there is another story that is growing up, and Lisa will tell you that one.
Everyone's heard the story of John Steele, I'm guessing, in the books and everything like that. Are you ready to hear me wreck it and ruin it? No, the story with John Steele is, it's a beautiful story. However, there's a few holes in this story, and the reasons are as follows. I like the story, but I like to also debug D-Day myths, as I call them, things that maybe appear in the movies or the books that, when you look into them, actually don't seem to add up. Sometimes 2 + 2 isn't 4, and you kind of want to suss out why. With John Steele, it's a classic example, because the argument of the John Steele, as Dale just said, he was dropped in, had his parachute snagged on the southwest corner of the church steeple in Sainte-Marie-Eglise. He hung there, playing dead, tried to take a couple of rounds at a few of the Germans below, eventually was captured, later on escaped. Everything, all's well that ends well. Now, the first ever record of this being made public was in the movie The Longest Day. Prior to that, there was no indication, there was no word whatsoever of this happening. The only thing was an interview that John Steele himself gave when he exited the forces, and some of you that have been in the forces, maybe this still applies. You have a document, explain what happened on this particular event, explain what happened on this day, so on and so forth. And when it came to what happened to him that morning, there was a section for him to write in his own words what happened, and he wrote 14 words. That was it, 14 words, and it basically described that he was snagged on the southwest corner and he swung under the rafters as he hung there. Now, when you see the church, you're going to see that there's a big question mark over this, right? Because you look at the average size of a parachute, and then you look at where the doorway, where the arch actually is, and how it's possible to be snagged up here but be swinging underneath here. There's red flag number 1. Number 2 is that he only ever gave one live interview or one public interview about it since the actual event took place, and that was when he was on the town square next to the church in Sainte-Marie-Eglise, and he was told, okay, so you were snagged on the southwest corner, which is, he said, yeah, that's where I was snagged. Now, that morning in Sainte-Marie-Eglise there was a fire. There was a fire on the town square, so he was asked, how is it that none of the locals saw you when they were putting out the fire? And he changed his story. And he said, oh, I wasn't snagged on the southwest, I was snagged on the northeast, the other side of the town square. Okay, red flag number 2. Number 3, after the movie The Longest Day came out, there were 2 groups that stepped forward to say, oh yeah, I remember seeing him. One set was German, one set was American. The American said, yeah, we remember seeing him, we saw him there D-Day +2. He was hanging there, and yeah, we thought he was dead, so we left him. The German said, oh yeah, we saw him, he was in the afternoon of D-Day. Now, John Steele himself claimed that he was cut down by the Germans just after dawn on June 6th. So how is it the only 2 eyewitness accounts of this claim to have seen him that afternoon, and also D-Day +2, when he himself said that he was cut down by the Germans shortly after dawn on June 6th? There's red flag number 3. The next part, I'm sorry about this, the next part is reconnaissance photos. there were reconnaissance photos taken of this whole area, okay, and there were 2 shots taken above Sainte-Mere-Eglise on dawnbreak, okay, so just after Utah Beach had hit. 2 reconnaissance of Sainte-Marie-Eglise, both of the church, and there is no parachute on the church. So that's red flag number 4. Number 5 is, if you think of all the paratroopers that were dropped, that were snagged in tree branches, so on and so forth, they were either left or the Germans just shot them. But we're led to believe that they went to the effort to climb up a bell tower, to lean over, and you'll see how difficult it is anyway, to then cut him down safely, pull him in and drag him back into the church. It just doesn't make sense compared to all the other paratroopers that were hanging from trees that were just left to die or killed. So that's another big question mark. The more you look into it, the more, I'm not saying, I don't want to say absolutely it didn't happen, but the more you dig about it, the more it would suggest it didn't happen. He might have been snagged and fell, but as far as this whole thing and this movie perception that we have in The Longest Day, I'm skeptical on it, just because of the amount of evidence that there is to suggest that he wasn't actually there on the morning of June 6th. But he is there now. So when we go over there, you'll see the church and you'll see this mannequin of John Steele. So the story is very much alive, and you'll see it in a lot of tour books. You'll see it in a lot of guidebooks. It is there, the story's out. But when you start digging and looking at archives of these events, actually, it kind of tells a little bit of a different story. He was also discharged for a gunshot wound to the upper right foot. That's why he was discharged, and that was quite a common injury in World War II. Think about that. That's all I'll say. But anyway, I don't want to debug any more of those nice stories. I'll let them be true. But what we're going to do here is get off the coach. We have your lunches underneath, so we can grab them and then head over towards Sainte-Marie-Eglise. We're going to spend a good amount of time here. It's a nice town to have a look around, and you also have the Paratrooper Museum. The Airborn Museum is a great museum. It's not, we don't want to bombard you with museums, but if you are really into the Airborn, it might be a nice museum for you to go to. But we'll head over to the square. We'll give you a time to meet up. We'll meet up back at the square, and then afterwards we'll come back to the coach and continue our day. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so your lunch underneath.
Just very quickly.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, the house that you could see on Utah, sort of down the beach a bit, I was asked whether that was one of the originals. No, it wasn't. Okay, so it was a post-war building, but there was, because they demolished most of the buildings along the coast prior to the landings. But there was one building at Omaha, and we'll probably talk about that one a little bit tomorrow.
Okay. Right, we're good. Come on, let's go. How long ETA?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Just a quick talk.
To the bridge, and then to the chapel was another 2 minutes past that.
Do you want to do the chapel?
No, I'll let you do that.
I don't know about what happens.
Okay, 1 second.
Got notes of the
No, I don't have notes. Alright, leave it with me. You do the first bit, let me see if I can do it. Otherwise we just won't do it.
Oh, I can look up there. Okay. Where's the... Okay. Yeah, because I didn't have the phone to see the message and stuff.
That's fine. We find out enough about the bridge, and then we can do the German cemetery instead.
Okay. All right, just very quickly, we'll tell you a little bit about Lafayette Bridge, where we're about to head in 5 minutes. Firstly, my apologies for missing the instructions. We'll do my Hail Marys tonight. Okay, so Lafayette Bridge, where we're heading. We've had the Pegasus story, so Sainte-Mere-Eglise and Lafayette Bridge are effectively the American Pegasus story. So there's a bridge that they want to secure. It's over the Murderette River. There's also bridges over the Douve as well. And so a group of paratroopers, it's a hodgepodge group from the 82nd, come together and they secure the eastern end of the bridge in the early hours of June the 6th. And so they secure this position. There's not many of these men. Gradually more men are coming in, but they end up with about 140, roughly about 140 guys there to defend this position. and the Germans begin to mount their counterattacks. So they're able to hold off on the 6th and stop the Germans sort of driving them out of that position. The Germans then bring up armour the next day to try and dislodge them from the position. At that stage, they've also secured a 57mm anti-aircraft gun, anti-tank gun, which they place on some high ground behind the bridge. The Germans knock that out and advance towards the bridge with some tanks. Two of the men go down toward the German position with bazookas and take out the German tanks. One of those chaps' name is Marcus Heim, and I believe that the bridge is now named after him. I'm not sure. We'll find that out when we get closer. So the next day, this is the 82nd guys. The next day, elements from the 325th Minor Regiment also come to their assistance, and so you have the position bolstered, and again the Germans are mounting counterattacks against that position. So these chaps from the 82nd, they're basically from the 505th Parachute Regiment, and then of course the 325th Glider Regiment comes up and assists them as well. They hold off the Germans yet again. Now, Lisa mentioned the 91st Air Landing Division that has been put into this area to defend it. They're actually very good troops. So the German troops here are actually, you might call them elite troops. So they also had the 158th Grenadier Regiment, which was part of that division. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, and they were a paratrooper regiment, so they're fighting there as well. And then they had various infantry coming up to support with artillery fire. So it's for several days the fighting goes around here. And eventually the tanks that had come ashore at Utah make their way up the road and get to Lafayette Ridge. And once those tanks arrive, then the bridge becomes secured from there on to allow the troops to move on forward. So that in a nutshell is what's going on. The other thing I thought I'd mention is, you know, these paratroopers coming down in the middle of the night and in the dark, they're trying to find their way. Now, you all would have seen the film, and I think it happens in Band of Brothers with the clickers, the crickets that they have. So some of the guys are clicking. I think one of the padres from the regiment, he's in a field by himself, and he's clicking away, and then somebody calls out, "Oh, for God's sake, stop that noise!" You know, to tell him to that. Another one was one of the who was it? It was wrote it down. Sorry. Oh yeah, a fellow by the name of Dutch Schultz. Great name, nickname. Anyway, he landed virtually in front. He was in a field, and he runs into a German sentry, and they just look at each other, and then the German sentry goes for his rifle, raises his rifle, fires a shot that hits the rifle bolt on Schultz's holding his rifle, and deflects and ricochets away, and then both men just turned and ran. So you know, that element of surprise and fear and all that sort of stuff. And the other one, one of the funny things was the surgeon, Captain Lyle Putnam. He's in the dark and he hears a noise, and so he calls out the code name. The code name, if you met somebody, you called out Flash, and they were meant to respond with thunder. Right? So he calls out Flash. The reply is Jesus Christ, and the fella turns around and runs. So we have all these unexpected little things happening in the night. That's the humorous side of things, but of course it ends up a really vicious, bloody fight. And that first group of paratroopers that get to Lafayette, as I said, they numbered about 140, maybe 130, 140. By the end of the fighting over those 3 days, they're down to 88. So they're losing roughly 40%, 45% in that action. So, and that was pretty standard for the paratroop regiments. They suffered the highest casualties over the Normandy period, and it's around. And we're talking divisional level casualties at that rate as well. So, yeah, they're very high casualties. All right. So, yeah, if we want to hop out and wander up to the memorial. Yes, we want to hop out. Yeah.
Alright everybody, we're only 3 minutes away now from the German cemetery, so we were going to do this tomorrow, but we've got the time this afternoon, so we'll just give us a bit more flexibility tomorrow. So we actually just straight past it, but we have to in order to turn around and go back to it. So it sounds a bit odd for us to take you to the German cemetery, but I think it's important to see the diversity between the American, the Commonwealth and the German cemetery anyway, because it's one of those times and moments you've got to sit back and think, okay, well that man was still someone's son, it was still someone's, you know, whatever the case may be, everyone was doing what they thought was right for their country at the time, be it rightly or wrongly, and so just to see the diversity between a German cemetery and the American cemetery that we'll go to tomorrow, and we will do a Commonwealth cemetery in a couple of days. Now with this particular German cemetery, there are 5 German cemeteries in the area in comparison to the 2 American cemeteries that we have in the area, and that's not because there were necessarily more Germans. It goes down to the idea of repatriation. As I'm sure you are aware, during the American Civil War it was kind of written into context that American soldiers or American families were more concerned that their loved ones are not going to be properly looked after, regardless of whether they were alive or dead. So it was written into, whether it was one of your constitutions or laws, I'm not sure, but it was brought about that American soldiers will be looked after and sent home. It doesn't matter whether they're alive, if they pass away, if they're killed, we will look after those men. And that was heavily fought for by American families, so they were less reluctant to allow their loved ones to go away fighting. Commonwealth countries work differently. We don't believe in repatriation, which is why we have more cemeteries, because where these men fall is where they stay. They don't get the option of going home. American families have the option of bringing their loved ones home, and as a result around 70% of American soldiers were repatriated. Commonwealth were not, so that's why we have more Commonwealth than we do American. Alright, plus you have bigger cemeteries, we call them collection cemeteries, the Commonwealth and the German ones. I say smaller, this one isn't. This one actually has over 21,500 burials in this grave. 21,500 burials. Now the way it's laid out is slightly different. It was, I think it was after the Treaty of Versailles, or during the Treaty of Versailles, there were restrictions put on German burial sites, military burial sites. Firstly, there are no crosses here. What you will see are called Maltese crosses. Maltese crosses just add a little bit of depth and height to the cemetery, but that is it. Every other soldier or every burial is actually a plaque, a bronze plaque on the floor. And as we pull up a little bit further, you'll see there's a very flat area. Now, the other thing to remember is that in Commonwealth cemeteries and American cemeteries, there is 1 soldier per stone, 1 soldier per grave. Here it's different. If you imagine the size of this place, which is now coming into view on your left-hand side, remember this has got 21,500 men buried in it. That's because if you look at each of these little stones, if I can like kind of paint you a picture a little bit, if you imagine there's a stone here on the floor, when you look at it, it will have the soldier's rank and the soldier's name and then the date of birth and death, if it is known, okay? But sometimes you'll see 2 names. And that means that there are 2 bodies buried here. Sometimes you'll have a stone that will have 2 names, and then there'll also be 2 names upside down, which means the 2 names that you can read are here below you, and the other 2 names are the other side here. Then you see another stone where you can read 2 names, that means they're also buried here. So in this cemetery you have men buried as much as 4 deep. Alright? The other thing is that you will find a lot of these names are not necessarily German. There are a lot of Polish and Russian POWs. Remember, this area was occupied and looked after by the 716th Division. The 716th Division were not, shall we say, the creme de la creme as far as the Germans are concerned. You don't want your best forces in an area where no one believes anything is actually going to happen. Your best fighting force you want over in the Pas de Calais. As a result, the age range here was anywhere between the ages of 16 and 79. That was the age range for the men that were actually based here in Normandy for the Nazis as part of the 716th. But a lot of them were also POWs. Russian and Polish POWs who had two options. You either fight or you go to a concentration camp. Well, a lot of them decided to fight, put on a uniform. Congratulations, you're now going to be based here in Normandy. Now, there is a mound in the centre. I don't like guiding in cemeteries, that's why I don't want to do that inside here. That's just a personal preference of mine. There is a mound in the centre. That is a mass burial site for 297 soldiers that have not been identified. The reason for this, and there's a lot of unknown soldiers in this particular cemetery, and that's because this wasn't actually open and established as a cemetery until 1961. So quite a few years after, considering most of the Commonwealth and American and Allied cemeteries were only about 5 years after the war. This one took a lot longer. This was a temporary American cemetery, in fact, before Colville-sur-Mer came into effect as being your main cemetery in the area, and the German cemetery was in the field next to it. That's where the Germans were buried and the Americans were buried here. Now, where a lot of soldiers have dog tags, Germans did not. Germans had a logbook. Now, it's a risky subject to bring up, but we of course talk about the German soldiers being bad people and things like that. There was plenty of Allied soldiers who, if they shot a soldier, would take a souvenir. And a lot of the times those souvenirs would be logbooks. So a lot of German soldiers were found, but their logbooks had been taken, and that was part of a souvenir. You know, and it's a harsh reality. You know, it was done on both sides. I'm not saying that we're bad people, but it was one of those things done, and they did the same to us as far as dog tags and things like that are concerned. So bodies are found, there's no way to identify them. So these logbooks went missing. So a lot of them in here are unnamed. Ein Deutsch soldier. Okay, that's all that will say in there. There is one person to note in here though. In fact, there's a few that I won't go into detail about because there were, as you know, a lot of bad Germans. And when I say Germans, obviously we're talking Nazis. Not necessarily all Germans were Nazis, as we know, but there were a few very bad characters and a few SS that are in here. But there's one man, which is a guy called Michael Whitman. I don't know if you've heard of Michael Whitman, but he was a tank commander in a Tiger I, and if he was an Allied soldier, he'd probably be the most celebrated tank commander in history, because he is solely responsible for taking out 157 enemy tanks, as in Allied tanks, 300 pieces of artillery and 200 small vehicles, just on his one Tiger I. That's what it's been reported as. He's buried here, and his grave is notoriously robbed constantly. So what they've actually had to do is cement his plaque to stop it being stolen. And if you're interested in seeing where his grave is, I can point you in the direction of it. It's in plot 147, grave 130 in the back right hand corner, but I'm happy to walk you to him if you wanted to see him. But there is a nice mound in the middle if you want to go up and actually have a view looking down on a very hopefully peaceful area, but the doorway, you'll notice when you go up to it, is very narrow. The architect of this cemetery wanted you to be alone facing 21,000 German soldiers, so it's only wide enough for one person to get through at a time, just to add a bit more of that somber feeling to it. So if anyone does have any questions on the cemetery, feel free to come and ask us. But we'll get off the coach now, and we'll spend, let's be back on the coach no later than 4 o'clock. And then we'll get you back to the hotel nice and early for a bit of a relaxing afternoon. Is that okay? Anyone got any questions? Okay, when you're ready, let's head on. Yes, sorry, restrooms, they are on the left-hand side if you need.
No i 16:25, Bayeux, Nowotel. Dzień dobry wieczór. Koniec pracy. Prawie. W bardzo dużym uproszczeniu. Koniec kręcenia kierownicą. Ale jeszcze zostało sprzątanko. A dzisiaj tego sprzątanka jest naprawdę dużo, bo po plażach jeździliśmy. A to z reguły nie oznacza nic dobrego dla stanu tapicerki podłogowej. Więc dużo sprzątania. Ładnie je zaparkował, ładnie. Myślę, czy ja się pod drzewem nie pójdę schować. Nie. Parking wielki, ale Francuz oczywiście na miejscu dla autobusów musi stanąć. nie byłby sobą. No dobrze. Ale żeby za dobrze nie było, sprzątać to ja... Wow! Was tu zrobiłem. Sprzątać to ja nie będę teraz. Bo nie ukrywam, że to może nie jest gorąco, jest ciepło, ale jutro wieczorem będzie znacznie przyjemniej. Jak się do 10 stopni temperatura zmieni. I wtedy będziemy robić sprzątanko, odkurzanko, szybki, podłoga, mopik, szyba czołowa i tak dalej, i tak dalej. No i co nam jutro dzień przyniesie, to zobaczymy.